In 1988, Chile was under the rule of a brutal dictator named General Pinochet. During this time, 120 activists who opposed Pinochet were arrested and imprisoned. They were placed in a facility with over 2,000 other inmates. Inside the prison, 4 of the activists began protesting, demanding to be transferred to a special prison designated for political prisoners. As their protest gained traction, the authorities eventually agreed, but under the condition that security would be tighter. What the guards didn't realize, however, was that the 4 activists had secretly planned an escape. Once the decision was made, the prison warden gathered the inmates and announced that they would be transferred to the long-abandoned Units 7 and 8. Since these blocks hadn't been used in years, there were no standard prison facilities. The inmates were allowed to bring personal items like mattresses, stoves, guitars, and other necessities. All food, hygiene supplies, and clothing would have to come from family shipments. Family visits were also reduced to once a month. After laying down the rules, the guards escorted the inmates to their new block. As everyone began picking their cells, an inmate named Vargas rushed to claim cell number 50 on the upper floor. But to his disappointment, it was already taken. He had no choice but to settle for cell number 51. Meanwhile, his 3 friends, Jimenez, Patricio, and German, chose cells on the floor below, aligned directly under cell 50. Later, when Jimenez and German came upstairs, they were frustrated to learn that Vargas didn't get cell 50. It complicated their escape plan. Still, the inmates settled in. On the 3rd day, they were already adapting well to the new prison. Despite the tighter security, they had more freedom. They built their own tools, played soccer, cooked, and did various activities. The place felt more like a dorm than a prison. One afternoon, near the yard, Vargas, Jimenez, and German gathered to discuss their escape plan. Vargas, who was an engineer, explained that they would need to dig an 80-meter tunnel to reach freedom. After discussing the risks, they agreed to start digging a hole inside Jimenez's cell on the 1st floor. All the excavated soil would be moved and stored upstairs. But they faced one big problem: how would they transport the soil to the upper floor? The original plan involved digging through the ceiling of cell 50, which was directly above Jimenez's. But since Vargas got cell 51, which wasn't aligned, that plan wouldn't work. Vargas told them he would figure something out later. For now, they needed to start gathering tools. 2 days later, in the lower cell, the group agreed to start digging behind the stove wall. Each time they made progress, they would reseal the wall to hide any damage. The next afternoon, Jimenez and German tested the wall and patched it up using homemade glue. Meanwhile, upstairs, as Vargas was testing some tools, his cellmate Lalo approached and handed him a screwdriver, saying he wanted to join their escape plan. The next day in the prison yard, German and Jimenez saw guards escorting new political prisoners. One of them, Lira, was someone German recognized. Lira's father had died after being beaten by the military. After the guards left, Patricio, who was a doctor, approached the new prisoners, offering to do medical checkups before they entered their cells. A week later, Lira met with his lawyer. The lawyer told him that the charges were serious. Not only had Lira opposed the regime, but he had also assaulted a prosecutor. Lira faced possible execution. The news left him devastated. Back in the prison, Jimenez, German, Patricio, and Vargas were now working to break through the ceiling in Vargas's cell using the screwdriver Lalo had given them. To cover the noise, Lalo sat outside playing the guitar and singing. But just as they were about to finish, the ceiling gave out and crumbled. Panicked, Vargas told the others to split up and gather as much paper and eggs as they could to patch it. While waiting, Vargas climbed into the ceiling and discovered that the attic above them was wide and connected to multiple other cells. Downstairs, once the group collected everything they needed, they handed it all up to Vargas so they could begin their works. But when Lalo was about to go back outside and sing, he saw the guards coming to search all the cells. Lalo panicked. To avoid suspicion, he used a coded song to warn his friends inside the cell. He also invited other inmates to sing along to distract the guards. Fortunately, everything was taken care of just in time before the guards entered the cell. They were safe. The next afternoon, Vargas and German cleaned up the patched ceiling to make it look better. Days passed. On the 56th day, Vargas, German, and Jimenez began breaking through the wall in the lower cell. Not long after, Lalo came in and said the guards were coming. They quickly cleaned up the debris and covered the hole in the wall with a gas tank. When the guard entered, he didn't suspect a thing. After the guard left, they continued breaking the cell wall. A few days later, after the wall was fully breached, the four of them took turns digging the tunnel using whatever tools they had. The debris was carried in bags, taken upstairs, and hidden in the attic. On the seventh day of digging, after working hard for days, Vargas measured the tunnel. It turned out they had only dug 1.9 meters, meaning the way out was still very far. Everyone felt hopeless. That afternoon, the guards ordered all the prisoners to leave their cells for a sudden inspection. Seeing the guards act arrogantly, Lira got angry and started a fight. As a result, Lira was thrown into an isolation cell. 3 days later, he was released. After leaving isolation, the prosecutor, who happened to be visiting the prison, warned Lira not to cause any more trouble. If he continued to resist, he would end up like his father. When Lira tried to hit the prosecutor, the guards stopped him. Elsewhere, as German was about to carry debris upstairs, he ran into a guard on the stairs. Suspicious, the guard ordered him to open his bag. German tried to stay calm. When the guard checked, the bag only contained clothes. The debris hidden beneath the clothes wasn't discovered. German was relieved, but just as he was about to walk away, the guard told him to come to the office. Before going, German handed the bag to Vargas. In the office, German was extremely nervous. The guard then showed him an adult magazine and said he had found it during the previous cell inspection. If German had any more adult magazines, the guard asked to borrow them. One night, while Jimenez and Patricio were digging the tunnel, German suddenly screamed in frustration. He shouted, "We're doomed." He had just heard a radio broadcast saying that General Pinochet's government would start executing citizens who refused to obey or had ever opposed him. That meant sooner or later, all the activists in the prison would be executed. The next day, realizing they didn't have much time left, Vargas, German, Jimenez, and Patricio agreed to invite a few other inmates to join the escape plan. One morning, while the prisoners were playing soccer, Lira told Jimenez that he already knew about their plan. Jimenez was shocked. Smiling, Lira pointed out the soil under Jimenez's fingernails. He assured him not to worry, he wouldn't tell anyone because he wanted to join. Since their secret was out, after the game, Jimenez brought Lira to their cell. Vargas, German, and Patricio were already there. After discussing it, they agreed to let Lira join the plan. 3 months later, on day 149, while doing laundry, Vargas, German, and Jimenez discussed who outside the prison could help them. Vargas suggested Jimenez's wife, Paulina. She knew other activist friends who were still free. Hearing his wife's name, Jimenez hesitated. He didn't want to involve his family in such a dangerous mission. But since she was the only one with connections to other activists, Jimenez reluctantly agreed. The next month, on family visit day, Jimenez explained the escape plan to his wife. Paulina was furious and told him not to be reckless. If the plan failed, he would be executed immediately. Jimenez tried to calm her down. If he stayed quiet and did nothing, he'd still be sentenced to death. It was a race against time, escape and risk being caught, or stay and wait for execution. After hearing that, Paulina finally agreed to help. One afternoon, on day 205, a colonel suddenly arrived and ordered the prison chief to conduct a full cell search. Knowing his friends were still digging inside, Jimenez caused a commotion to buy them time. The tunnel remained undiscovered. However, because of the incident, all prisoners were forced to sit under the hot sun in the yard, while Jimenez, the instigator, was thrown into isolation for a week. Out in the yard while being scolded, Vargas and the other inmates suddenly began singing the national anthem. It was as if they wanted to say that activists and the government might have different political views, but they were not enemies. They were both fighting for the beloved country. A week passed. After being released from solitary confinement, Jimenez was taken to the courthouse, where he met his lawyer, who was in a conversation with the prosecutor. Without any small talk, the prosecutor informed him that the trial was over. The judge had ruled that Jimenez would be executed. In the silence that followed, the prosecutor offered him a cigarette, but Jimenez declined. The lawyer then pulled Jimenez aside to talk privately. She told Jimenez that Paulina and several other activists on the outside had already begun helping with the escape plan. Hearing this gave Jimenez hope, and he expressed his deepest gratitude. On day 392, one of the prisoners was seen digging the tunnel while Jimenez worked behind him, clearing out the debris. During the digging, Jimenez was puzzled when his friend suddenly went silent. It turned out his friend had passed out. Panicking, Jimenez dragged him out. During lunch, Patricio explained that their friend had likely fainted from lack of oxygen. The tunnel was getting deeper, and oxygen was running low. Vargas suggested they build a fan to circulate air into the tunnel. Since no one knew much about machines, Jimenez planned to ask for help from inmates in another cell. When he met them, Jimenez immediately asked for their assistance in escaping the prison. 3 weeks later, after the fan was completed, the digging resumed. To make things easier, Vargas also installed more lights. At the end of the tunnel, Vargas stared at a photo of his late wife and child, whispering, "Please pray for me. Just one more step, and I'll be free." Meanwhile, the prosecutor was seen interrogating an inmate named Bigot. The prosecutor said he was suspicious. Jimenez hadn't reacted at all when told he would be executed. He was sure Jimenez was planning something. The prosecutor told Bigot to keep a close eye on him. If Bigot provided useful information, he'd be freed. But if he was caught covering up the plan, the prosecutor threatened to have his family killed. Before leaving, he handed Bigot a cigarette as a sign of their agreement. Months passed. On day 524, they finally managed to dig 80 meters, reaching beyond the prison wall. To mark the exit discreetly, Jimenez poked a small hole in the soil and sprayed red paint as a signal. The next morning, one of Paulina's activist friends walked near the prison wall under the pretense of taking a stroll to inspect Jimenez's signal. That afternoon, while the inmates were watching TV, Jimenez approached Bigot. He was about to invite Bigot to join the escape, but when he saw Bigot smoking the same brand of cigarettes as the prosecutor, he grew suspicious. The following week, during family visitation day, a priest who was a friend of Paulina's came to meet Vargas. The priest said his associate had found Jimenez's signal, but it was too close to the wall. He advised them to dig a bit farther. Vargas understood and also asked the priest to help prepare new identities for them. A month later, one morning while Lira and his friend were inspecting the tunnel, an earthquake struck. Fortunately, they managed to get out safely. That afternoon, Vargas gathered the inmates involved in the escape plan. He told them he had inspected the tunnel. It was still safe, but there were cracks. If another earthquake hit, it could collapse. They all agreed to move the escape date earlier. 2 days from now, while the others watched TV, they would begin their escape. Vargas also asked Jimenez to inform Paulina of the change in plan and to tell her, "Please pick us up with a bus at the bridge." The next day during family visitation, unlike before, the inmates involved in the escape seemed to cherish the time with their loved ones even more. They knew freedom was near. That evening, while playing chess with an inmate named Emilio, Vargas shared the escape plan for the next night and invited him to come along. But Emilio declined. He was paralyzed and would only slow them down. Besides, his entire family had died. Even if he escaped, he had nowhere to go. Bravely, Emilio said, "Run. Run as fast as you can. Be my legs. Carry on our struggle." Vargas was deeply moved. The next night, as the guards and other prisoners watched TV, Vargas and his friends began to prepare, one by one. They quietly slipped out of the TV room and headed to Jimenez's cell. Inside, Lira took attendance to ensure no one was left behind. Meanwhile, Bigot noticed Jimenez had disappeared and began searching for him. On his way, he ran into Emilio. Emilio tried to stop him, but Bigot easily shoved him aside and continued on. When Bigot arrived at Jimenez's cell, he found only Lira left, getting ready near a hole in the wall that led to the escape tunnel. Realizing he had been discovered, Lira tried to persuade Bigot to escape with them. But Bigot refused. His family was being held hostage. To save them, he felt he had no choice but to report the escape to the prosecutor. A fight broke out between them. Lira was stabbed in the scuffle, while Bigot was knocked unconscious. Meanwhile, after Vargas and the others made it through the tunnel, they immediately continued toward the bus. But German grew anxious. Lira hadn't shown up. He asked to go back and get him, telling the others, "If I'm not back in 5 minutes, leave without me." Back at the prison, as the inmates were returning to their cells after watching TV, they were shocked to find Emilio fallen from his wheelchair near Jimenez's cell, with a hole in the wall revealing a tunnel. A wave of inmates rushed after the escapees. The guards, now suspicious, sprang into action. Back at the bus, everyone grew restless. German and Lira were still missing. Just as the bus was about to leave, German finally arrived, but he was alone. With no time to waste, the bus departed, leaving Lira behind. Inside the prison, several inmates who didn't manage to escape were quickly apprehended. When the warden saw the tunnel, he was stunned. Moments later, the colonel arrived. After hearing that 49 inmates had escaped, the colonel stood in silence, trying to contain his rage. Meanwhile, Lira was hiding in the bathroom, wounded and in pain. Tears streamed down his face. He had failed to escape. In the prosecutor's office, chaos erupted when he was informed of the breakout. Furious, he threw the phone and smashed everything on his desk. Hours passed as the bus made its way out of the city. Paulina handed out new identities to each of the escapees. At every stop, the driver dropped off one prisoner at a time, each greeted by waiting family members. This was more than just a prison break. The escape of 49 political prisoners struck a major blow against the authoritarian regime. It was a symbol of civilian resistance, a symbol that the military's iron walls could, in fact, be broken.